We're now live on YouTube with the November 21st, 2018 meeting of the Node.js modules team. We have 8 members on the call right now, which is not quite quorum, so we may need to punt on things that have to do with making decisions about landing things. But in the meantime, we do have a pretty full agenda. We could dig into things. I guess one thing that I think we can maybe even just move forward on, because it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It has 9 sign-offs. If everyone could look at number 218 really quickly, which is just it's changing the rules to be more explicit that individuals who are requesting to join the team, if there's no objections, they can show up to their first meeting. I think that this is a nice thing to be clear about. If you can pop into that issue and just give an LGTM on it, assuming you agree with it, and then if we can reach quorum in there, and perhaps we can just land it independent of the meeting quorum.
Do we maybe have quorum between the people who have approved it and the people who are on this call?
I think it's not worth the time to try to dig in and figure it out. Everyone who's on the call, if you could take a look and just LGTM if you like it, I'll take a peek afterwards. The next one that we had on here for approving PRs is the ESM Revolver spec and implementation refinements. I don't know, is Guy with us today? Guy, do you want to just give a quick update on what's going on there, even if we don't have the time to dig in too much?
Sure. I guess it'll be the same thing that applies to your PR as well. But we discussed this last week, and it has a number of improvements to error handling. And then there was one case around the main handling that Gil had some questions about. So we actually removed that from the PR. So it's basically almost exactly matches what we have right now in the current implementation. It just makes sure that there's an exact spec and that the code of how the resolver works exactly matches that spec. And I feel like that puts us on a good footing where, as we make changes to the resolver, the code and the spec can kind of move side by side. So I was hoping to get that merged today. Everyone on the call now, if you could, at least if you've had a look, if you could approve it, that would be a huge help. We've only got 5 approvals so far. So Jeffrey, Gus, Jeremiah, Salah, Bradley, Rob, having 6 extra gets us almost there. So it would be a great help. If you have any questions, I'm happy to discuss it a little bit as well. Sure.
Excellent. Thank you, Guy. We've got 9 people now. Maybe by the end of the meeting, we can have enough people to dig in further on that. So the next thing that we had up on here is update in progress. We've got a 3-minute time box. Salah, did you have any update on what's going on with surveys?
Yeah, from my end, I opened that issue and I hope people would give some input there. Other than that, I don't have updates, and I don't think the survey is going to be moving forward until there's enough participation to actually do that.
Okay, is that it for now?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay, excellent. Can we remove that from the agenda for a future meeting?
I had a point to make about that.
Oh, okay, sorry, Jeffrey, I missed that. Your hand is up. Go for it.
I added a comment to that thread. As we've been working on the proposals for the phase 2 stuff, there are definitely some questions that are basically like, we wonder what the users would prefer for this. And I think it'll absolutely be something that could be, could become a survey, or the questions where it's, to answer that question about user preferences, I think will lead kind of naturally into a survey. So maybe as we're getting close to wrapping up the proposals for phase 2 or starting to implement them, I think, or I would be interested at least in revisiting the surveys and trying to get something out to help guide us in that development.
Okay, perfect. One thing that we could potentially rely on, I'd have to reach out, but I know the NPM is doing their large survey soon. And one of the people from NPM reached out to me about, if there's questions that I think we should have. So perhaps I can ask them about us participating in their survey, because they have, everything on Rails in a pretty wide distribution. So maybe we could get some of the questions we want to ask into that broader ecosystem survey.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, I'll follow up with my contact there on that then. Okay, so the next thing that we have on the agenda is number 123, thinking about deadlines. We have a 5-minute time box, so that we may not need it. I'll kick off the discussion. We've got some consensus as to the things that should be in phase 2, and we're beginning discussions around what phase 3 would be looking like. So perhaps deadline is not the right term to use, because it's a loaded term, but something just like goals for completion perhaps is a nice way to put it. But I do think that we should start thinking about timelines as to when we would like to have these phases done. So I was kind of wondering to the group, do people have any sort of opinion as to what kind of timeline we should be looking at to have phase 2 completed? And if there's any insight into what that may be right now. Not everyone at once, please.
So at least for some of the questions about loaders in the module map, we've kind of had some waiting period. So I don't know if we're going to actually do that in phase 2, but since it seems like loaders are related, that might get pushed more towards phase 3. We're still waiting to hear back. I don't know if Jan is on the call, but me and Jan need to sync up again sometime and get back to the group on what we talked about. So that's it for me.
Salah, you have your hand up?
Yeah, so I think 2.1, it's an issue, like I'm just trying to get the number. So my understanding from last meeting is that we actually have to, break off into groups discussing the different topics. Yeah, to my surprise, basically, I'm waiting for the discussion 2.1 to happen. And I think Bradley pointed out that he and Jan will be continuing the discussion. So there's obviously a disconnect. I just don't know. From my perspective, I want to be part of 2.1. And I believe that pushing it off to phase 3 or any other decision, basically I will object on, because up until this point, I haven't really had, a good result trying to be part of the discussion. And I don't know what else I can do to actually change that. So
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this doesn't seem to have to do with deadlines, though.
No, I actually kind of does, because if we move something to phase 3 without actually the people who are discussing it agreeing to that, then it kind of like affects when phase 3 will actually start, because if we move it, then we can start phase 3 soon. If we don't move it, then we start after we discuss it, basically.
And so, to be explicit, you're talking about taking things that are currently phase 2 and moving them to phase 3?
Objecting to it, actually. So because I haven't been given an opportunity to understand when the discussion takes place. I've been told that a discussion took place, and I've been waiting to actually be part of it. So yeah, that's really what I'm able to describe about it.
Okay. I think I'm getting what you're putting down, although I think that it is a little bit derailing from the topic at hand. It sounds like you see a risk with having deadlines based on this. But yeah. So, I guess what I can take away from that is, perhaps we should take a moment, perhaps not on this meeting, but to confirm that we still have consensus around phase 2, which is something that we reach consensus on. So perhaps that's something that we should do separately in our next meeting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I'll leave it up to the group, honestly. So
okay, I think we're running out of time on this. I would love to see, phase 2 completed before the end of Q1. And I don't think that that's unreasonable. I would even like to see us have some good progress on phase 3 as well. So just kind of setting that into people's minds, thinking about what it is. Keep in mind that April is when we're going to cut node 12. So, I think this timeline of April is good to think about. And this leads right into, the next, let's change the order here for a second. We have an issue about dropping the moratorium. And let's just jump right into that because I think it's more connected. And so kind of the context that I'll add here is, one of the reasons for having that timeline and thinking about deadlines is, especially with what we have right now as a moratorium, we can't be updating things upstream right now. Jeremiah, were you going to say something about the previous thing, or is this about what I'm getting into right now?
Maybe both, sort of just on timelines.
Okay, yeah. So why don't you bring that up, and I'll come back to the next agenda item just after.
Right. Regarding timelines, it can't just be April. Like, there's going to still be review on this in the Node.js repo. You need to target sooner than April.
Mm-hmm.
That's all really is targeting sometime in April might be too late.
Okay. And so I guess maybe that, Guy, you have your hand up? If you're trying to speak, Guy, you're muted.
Thanks, sorry. I was just wanting to dig into that and find out how much time we think is adequate for review, because should we be targeting a month? Should we be targeting 2 weeks? So that, should we be thinking March or, mid-Feb or mid-March or whatever? So it would be useful to kind of have an idea of what that process will be when we're ready, so that we can make sure that there's enough time for all the right checks and balances there.
So Guy, I'm gonna hold that thought for a second and preface it with the moratorium bit, because I do think one of the things that we can consider here is the delta that we need to get reviewed and how much things we actually need to land. And so, when we examine what we have with the moratorium right now, we're working inside of our fork. We're doing everything inside of our fork. We're not upstreaming anything. We're not changing anything. It means that while we're doing this, people in the ecosystem are continuing to move forward with the semantics and the way in which the current implementation work, which has been out there, for about a year. So it's, people are starting to really rely on that. So I personally believe that if we have consensus that certain things are going to be changing or breaking or different, that we should be upstreaming those and likely upstreaming them to 11 as soon as possible. And I think the sooner that we get the delta closer between upstream and our fork, the easier it will be for us to upstream things later. So very much to what Jeremiah was saying about, like, hey, we want to maybe have this in March, or maybe we want to have it in February. If we upstream the majority of what would be the quote unquote breaking changes far in advance of that, and simply land enhancements as we move forward, we do have a lot more flexibility on timeline, even like not necessarily like for something like loaders, if it's not ready for production. That's something that could come after the cut of 12. Although I do know that people have strong feelings about not removing things from the current implementation until we have alternatives. But if we know that the current version is simply not going to be supported, I don't know that we're doing anyone a favor by leaving it in there. Guy, it's up to you.
Yeah, I mean, I almost feel slightly the opposite way, actually, that I think it's great that we should upstream and, like with the dynamic modules refactoring that Gus did and things like that. Like, if we can be refactoring those improvements and that helps reduce the diff, then great. But pushing up breaking changes at random times I always imagined the sort of that when experimental modules was removed, that would be the kind of shift into the new paradigm. But I mean, yeah, it's open to interpretation, I guess. But yeah, just saying that there's an argument to be had for the other direction as well.
So with that being said, I guess like the first one, does anyone object to upstreaming the minimal kernel as it is right now?
Yes, I do.
Okay, cool. And then, you know, as you object to that, what would you want to see as, like, do you think that we could go through per commit? So like one that I'm thinking of in particular is Gus's refactoring, right? Like, I don't see any reason why that shouldn't be upstreamed if it's existing in both forks, in both branches and not making any differences. Are we open to, on a commit by commit basis, potentially upstreaming things that make sense? Salah, you have your hand up?
What I was thinking as an alternative would be, and just it's, you know, like a very raw idea, to try to see if loader that exists in experimental modules can actually be, you know, used over the minimal implementation that we have. You know, how much work would it take to actually make the two, you know, work? So obviously, loaders will then be something that will be changed down the road, and we have to make that very clear. But I don't know how much gap we're talking about and how much work, you know, if it's even possible. So that it's just an idea, right?
Any other thoughts there?
I was just going to clarify there as well. So from the GitHub issue, as Salah mentioned, you know, the thing that I felt was important on that one was that we should still have loaders because of the fact that people are experimenting with loaders, and it allows them to use ES modules in Node with other custom functionality, which feels useful to me. And to suddenly take that away is one of the things that would worry me. But I'm all for upstreaming, and as much as we can. I'm definitely open to that. And I think that those are good discussions to be having.
Okay, so we are rounding out. We've got about 3 minutes left on this topic. We've got a bunch of hot hands. Guy, you just had your hand up. Jan, it's up to you.
One quick note I have for the upstreaming part. For me, one of the big appeals of upstreaming is that we could stop maintaining the ECMAScript fork. So if we upstream, I would be strongly in favor of just shifting the work to upstream.
Rather than individual commits.
Yeah.
Okay, next up we've got Jeffrey.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding upstreaming, but is upstreaming basically replacing the experimental modules? Well, that flag would just point to our thing instead. The new implementation instead.
Upstream just means landing the commits on Node.js/node, like in the main repo, and that would be what would start to go out in releases.
Okay, well then I don't know how this necessarily relates to that, but what I was going to say is the thing that concerns me is, like, I'm thinking of that guy that posted an issue on one of our repos, basically being like, you know, what are the docs for this going to look like when it's done? You know, am I going to have to use MJS? Am I going to use JS, etc.? And we were basically responded to him. They were like, we don't know. And I think, you know, that would be the kind of thing that, like, before we I mean, maybe that shouldn't be something that holds up upstreaming, but, like, you know, users are going to notice, I think, when what gets shipped changes UX, and so we should have some kind of a blog post or some kind of explanation of what that change is and where we think it's going, Like, are they going to have to start using MJS extension? Do we think that's going to be the final version of this, et cetera? So if we can't answer those questions yet, then maybe that means we shouldn't upstream, or I don't know. It's just something that we should consider, I think.
Okay. And Brad, you have your hand up?
I think the value in upstreaming is being able to update what we have consensus on to be in master. I think things we expect to change, I would feel uncomfortable upstreaming a variety of things stating they're not going to change and keeping other things which are expected to change. In light of that, I really don't feel comfortable keeping the loader flag if we do upstream, because I heavily want to change that loader flag in a variety of ways.
So I think that's like a really good example. If we have consensus already that the loader is not going to be the same loader, what benefit do we have? And Guy, I know you have specific feelings on this. So is that something you could talk to? We're just out of time.
Yeah.
To extend by 1 minute.
Okay, I'll try and summarize what I'm thinking. But basically, like especially with the minimal, it's a very opinionated. And you know, so far as one isn't providing the final solution, as it were, I think it's useful for users to be able to plug in custom resolvers. And so I think that's important for people to be able to use it in real use cases, where if they don't want to use MJS, for example, and they have real ways to get around that. And loader is currently the way we have to do that. If there's another way, that's fine. I'm more than happy for that. But I think to take that ability away entirely is a problem. And then, maybe we do have to, like, I also think if we look at phase 2 and phase 3 as separate, there's no reason we couldn't upstream, phase 2 with the loader flag and then upstream the new loader work after that. Or, I know that's exactly against what Bradley was saying, but just trying to think of ways of packaging this. I think that's what it's about, working out those boundaries.
Okay, let's revisit this discussion next week. Does anyone object to us, at the very least, discussing on a case-by-case basis upstreaming specific changes?
It depends on what you mean. I guess
I'll be very explicit for right now. We have an open pull request the pull request that just landed from Gus of refactoring dynamic modules that lands cleanly on master, and it's in our fork. It doesn't change any behavior, and it's just an extra commit that we're floating, that we don't need to be. Does anyone, including Gus, object to me opening a pull request? We could figure that out in the pull request on core. Okay, cool. I'll take that. I'll take that as a no, and I'll take the action item on that. The next topic that we have on the agenda is keeping ECMAScript modules up to date. A quick update on that. I've been doing the rebases and then kind of pushing if the rebase is, not causing any conflicts. And then when there was conflicts, for example, yesterday I opened a pull request and ran CI on it, and then landed it after CI was green. Does anyone have a problem with that process as we've been doing it right now? Cool. Michael, you had talked about some of the way that you're automating it, and I know that in the last meeting, I think it was who was it who? Ujwal was saying that they would maybe go and look into working with the working group to automate it, but it doesn't seem like there's been any movement on that. Michael, is that something that you could help follow up on between now and the next meeting?
I cannot promise anything, but I will try.
Okay, is there anyone else who would have time to potentially help with that? Okay, I'll volunteer myself then. I'll see what I can do to help, and then Michael, how about you and I pair on that? Cool.
I'd be happy to help as well.
Okay, was that Guy?
Yeah.
Okay, cool, great. We've got Gus. Were you saying something?
I also know there was someone else on last week's call who volunteered for that. I think it was Rizo Kuken. So if you reach out to them.
Okay, yeah, I'll reach out to them and we'll follow up and we'll try to just improve it. But at the very least, we're kind of unblocked on keeping things up to date, although it would be nice to be less manual. The other thing, just for a heads up to people, we moved it so that we now have a master branch and a modules LKGR, last known good release branch. Master is consistently just being kept up to date with upstream, and the modules LKGR is being rebased against that. So if you take a look, the pull requests against the branch are coming against modules LKGR, but when we have conflict with the rebase, then those pull requests are coming against master. And we'll just, let's just keep doing it and iterating, and we'll see. It appears that Michael Dawson has joined us in the meantime, and we now have quorum. So we did have 2 bits that we needed to. Oh, by the way, we've moved a couple people during this meeting. I reached out to a couple people, and 3 people have moved to observers. So 11 is now all we need for quorum, as there is currently only 21 active members. So with that being said, we had 2 issues that we wanted to try to approve from PRs. The first was governance, be explicit about meetings and new members can join. Does anyone object to landing that? Excellent. We'll move forward with that. And then the next one that we have is the ESM Revolver spec and implementation refinements. Does anyone have any objections or concerns with that PR? Excellent. So we can move forward with landing both of those PRs. Guy, do you want to land the ESM Revolver spec one and I can land the other one?
Sure, I can do that.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so where are we in the agenda now? Re-enable issues tab on ECMAScript modules. This is number 212. Gus, I believe you were the one who was leading on this one. We've got 5 minutes. Do you want to take it from here?
There isn't too much to say. Basically, just it's a implementation where code things are happening, and when issues with that code pops up, I think it would be nice to, put those with the code. Right now, I've seen issues opened on the core repo, and I've seen issues opened on the our modules repo, both of which seem like poor places to track that.
Okay. Well, it seems reasonable to me then that we re-enable issues, but keep them extremely scoped to the implementation. GitHub now has a thing where you can move issues. So do we have consensus that we'll enable issues, keep it focused explicitly to implementation related details, and move issues if they're off scope, out of scope? Okay, cool. Doesn't seem like we have any objections. I'm going to go ahead and enable that right now. Okay, issues have been re-enabled. So then this leads us to our last bit of agenda for today, which is our resolution proposal, number 228. I believe that this is Guy and Jeffrey. Which one of you would like to lead the conversation?
Just to clarify, a few of us have been involved in the process. It's kind of been spearheaded by Jeffrey, though.
Okay, I guess I'll just take over. Yeah, so I don't know if I'm happy to punt this to next meeting if people want time to read and review this. But this was building off. Let me see. How do I share my screen in this thing again? This was building off of the proposal from last time, which was what we call the package exports proposal, which concerned trying to enable bear specifiers as specifiers in, like, I've been thinking of them as like the string that comes after from in an import statement. So that was meant to, I forget if we already dealt with the entry point for ESM models before that or not, but this was aiming to cover that, as well as deep imports inside ESM packages. And then, as kind of spinning off from that, Guy wanted us to tackle specifiers more generally, because like something that doesn't start with just a bare specifier, so like a file. So, you know, like most importantly, relative files. And so we started writing this, and quickly realized we kind of have to cover CommonJS. Finally, we can't really avoid it anymore, because, you know, a path to a file, that file could be many things. So how do we deal with that? And so this went into those directions to try to make decisions and lock down workable proposals for that stuff as much as we can, while trying not to let the scope keep increasing as much as possible. So we're trying to avoid dealing with like the CLI entry point and the eval case and standard in, and, you know, I'm just trying to keep it restricted to specifiers as much as possible. So that's what this is. I guess I don't need to necessarily walk through this. If maybe time would be better spent with questions, or what do people want to do at this time?
Have you actually explained the proposal to everyone? I don't think you have.
I was just assuming people could read it, but I can explain it in summary, I guess, if people want. So basically, it's going through like how to handle this part of an import statement, right? So for packages, or this, you know, a specifier that starts with a bare specifier, you know, I'm just kind of deferring to the other proposal. For ESM files, if it's relative, so it starts with dot basically, it's going to resolve it as ESM, including if it's an MJS or a JS extension. We reserved specifiers that start with a slash for future use, because there's a question about how those should behave being compatible or not with browsers, because browsers have this relative to the host. Node traditionally has had it relative to the root of the file system, which we felt like isn't the most useful thing to have these, because that's, you generally can't share code that's written with that, and it wouldn't be compatible with browsers. So we kind of were like, well, this is an option for, you know, potential improvements in the future of like, we should figure out how we want to be compatible with browsers or not, or should this be pegged to relative to the package root or project root, things like that. But we felt like it doesn't necessarily need to be solved for phase 2, so we just kind of reserved it for future. And then absolute URLs would be things like this, that if Node knows exactly where to find it, it can find it. That doesn't mean that any type of URL is supported, like an HTTPS URL or whatnot. That's, again, also outside of the scope of this, but just covering those. And then this is basically covering all the same things for, you know, if what you're looking for is CommonJS. So if it's a bare specifier or starts with a bare specifier, then we have to look at the package.json for that package, and then that tells you how to either find the entry point or find, or, you know, deal with deep imports. And then this is probably the most controversial part. Based on some research I did of existing ESM packages, almost 1,000 of them, there aren't that many cases, like less than 5%, where users, and even that might be high because of the way I'm getting that number, where users are using an import statement to pull in a CommonJS file as opposed to a CommonJS package. And so there is already a way to do that, create require from path. So we were thinking like that might be just enough for now. And then there are various options for making it easier for people. But basically this is like a value judgment where we're deciding that treating treating JS and MJS as ESM by default is kind of more likely to be what users prefer, and that it should be more effort to do something other than that, so than a non-default behavior, to do CommonJS interop. But that since ESM is the standard now and it's the future, that should kind of be the default, and it takes more effort to mix the two. So that's the summary version of it. I can't really see anything now that I'm sharing my screen. So if Miles or somebody wants to moderate.
Yeah, I can handle moderating. Rob has their hand up, then Brad, and then myself.
Hi, Jeffrey. This looks really good. Just one question on the dual mode package. So it says that that you can get to the package by two ways, by the import statement, and it will assume the ESM entry point, or the create require from path. Does that mean so that we have effectively one global specifier, like one bare, like for example, Lodash, or whatever the name is, but that we can potentially load two instances of it into the registry?
So Bradley's much more of the expert on that issue than I am. Did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, this is basically all I wanted to talk about because I don't think it was brought up in depth enough. The one thing that I had going through and reading this was to ensure that no absolute specifier in import would ever be ambiguous in formats. Roughly, something that wasn't really talked about here is inside of package.json, they are kind of pushing out how to define if something is a CommonJS package or it's an ESM package. And so by specifying your package has to be in one of two modes, they don't have that problem. I think exports was what was in the README for that.
So it's assuming that we're taking, like, if we go through with this proposal, this requires you to put this block in here, and it could be as simple as this, which is sort of like the ESM version of main. This will basically say that's a signifier. This package exports ESM. It might also export CommonJS, but the existence of this key means this is an ESM package at least.
Yeah.
And we may add other signifiers in the future, like guys mode proposal or something. So in terms of the way this proposal was written, it was sort of like exports, and or other things in the future that also signify ESM if we also, adopt other proposals in addition.
So just to clarify that a little, it's a little vague on saying we have to choose a specific thing. It's just stating that packages will be in one mode at any given time. So the format of anything on disk has a statically queryable format that import knows. It doesn't affect the behavior of require. Changing require is very dangerous, and I would be very scared of changing how require treats formats.
So does that mean for a dual mode package, because it's declaring exports, that's implying that the whole contents is ESM, and yet the main entry point is not ESM? So it's like a one file exception.
No. So to understand this, you have to kind of take the scope of the proposal into account. The scope of the proposal is only about how import functions. Require itself remaining unchanged means that it will always treat stuff as CommonJS. By not reusing main for import in this proposal, is in its examples, it doesn't produce a collision. Collisions are very bad. They're pretty much the only thing I look for now when talking about resolvers. If you follow React, GraphQL, Create React App, or some of John David Dalton's ESM work, like ambiguity in specifiers has caused an enormous amount of headache and cause like people to drop MJS support because it allows the ability to have two formats. So by not changing require, you can still kind of get your dual mode package if you truly desire it. But I'd be very careful about desiring that feature, just based on the ecosystem feedback of people doing it.
Okay, I think that answers my original question then, which is that in the dual mode package, the instance you get via require going into that package is different from the instance you get using an import.
Yes, and there's actually a variety of ways this can also happen. Like if somebody capitalizes React and then doesn't capitalize it and they're on a case insensitive file system like Windows, they can also still get two different instances.
So back to the hands that we have up. I had put my hand up quickly after Brad, just a request, and we don't need to do it now. I had tried going through the proposal briefly, and I will spend more time afterwards. But one thing that I think the proposal would benefit from would be an executive summary at the top. Like what's a TLDR of what the difference is from what we have today to what would happen. And I know that there's a lot of context in here about like why or exactly how it would implement. But if there's a way that this could be like 5 or 6 bullet points, that would be really, really helpful, at least for me, because I would then have that high level context as I dig through all the context. It's hard for me to kind of pick it out since I wasn't part of drafting the document.
Sure.
Jeremiah, to you.
Okay, we'll need to read through this more, obviously. So from what I understand, this proposal allows you to import things from CommonJS packages. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Does it allow you to, does it actually allow you to import things from subfiles of CommonJS packages, or is that not allowed?
So yeah, so if you look under proposal, I kind of broke it up into 2 big sections. So it's like first is like importing from ESM, and then if you go down a bit, import statements from CommonJS, and then there's basically 3 types of imports. There's importing just the package root or package main, importing from a package something inside of it, like aka a deep import, and then there's just a loose files. So that would be, you know, like this, like a relative path where it could be a CommonJS or ESM file.
Right, and so well, it doesn't really specify. It doesn't really specify that something does or doesn't work, and there's a lot of text here. So okay. You're saying that would work, that to import subfiles.
So what I was so this is tentative. So the intent is to make this work, but we're also very concerned about the points that Bradley's bringing up about conflicting specifiers. If there's any potential for this causing some kind of conflict, then this would be dropped into like the same bucket of this, where it's basically like use, create, require from path. But yeah, if we can find a way to make this work without it causing issues of conflicts, then the intent is, yeah, something like this line where underscore is a CommonJS package and shuffle.js is a CommonJS file would be allowed and supported. And that would kind of be the only, you know, the only way to bring in CommonJS through an import statement would be like through, you know, there's a package boundary that defines files to be CommonJS inside that boundary.
Okay, and so just to clarify, there's no way to import a local CommonJS file without create module from require path, right?
As of this proposal, no.
Okay.
We had some ideas for how that could potentially be implemented in the future, but we were like, basically we were like, that adds a lot of potential complexity and pain for users. And at the moment, I'm thinking it's not as popular of a demand. If I'm wrong about that, then we find a solution. And these are, you know, 5 options for, I mean, there's already one solution, which is create require, which kind of sucks, I understand. And if users demand a better solution, then we have options. But that's kind of, yeah, the answer for now is basically just create require. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think so at this time.
Michael, you have your hand up?
Yes. So I have a question. Is the concept of a package boundary only, does it only exist if you use a bare specifier or also if you use a relative path?
So we discussed it in the context of a URL here. But yeah, I guess that's a good point. So is Guy on? Because like this, the package boundary stuff was, he wrote that mode ESM PR, which was really good, and that defined in code how package boundaries worked. And so I think big chunks of that PR would be part of this
So
in terms of defining that.
This kind of relates I don't know if it exactly relates to what Bradley was saying about it being well defined how a given file should load. But that would be my interpretation of what Bradley is saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bradley, but if you're going to load a file as a package, so you're importing it as a plain specifier name. When you resolve to that final file URL, it should load the same as if you just loaded that file URL itself. And that feels to me like an important invariant of the module system, because there are places like when we open up the resolver, if we get import.meta.resolve, people are going to be wanting to pass the resolved URL into dynamic import again, or treat that as the module. And if it suddenly loads differently, that's kind of odd. So I tend to think that that's a very important invariant of this sort of way of thinking about package boundaries, that they exist for both.
Okay, so that would mean that if you import something with a relative path and that thing has a package.json and is a common.js, you can still import that common.js.
Right. Yes.
So Guy, just so I'm clear, this language that I wrote here about absolute URLs and like searching up the path segments looking for package.json, that would apply the same to a relative URL, right?
That's the strong argument. I mean, we're discussing this, so I don't know if Bradley has any clarifications on that as well.
I can say I just agree. It should be statically knowable. That way we can ensure there's no ambiguity.
Okay. So yeah, I should probably move this language to say that it applies to both relative and absolute, but yeah, I guess that's the answer.
Okay, great. Jan, you have your hand up. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, just a quick side note. I think it's a lot easier to understand whether the package boundary makes a difference for these relative or absolute URLs when you separate out the resolving to a URL from determine the format. For determine the format, that is where the package boundary is then also considered. And that in that way, there's no difference between ./helpers temperature MJS or the full file URL. In both cases, it gets resolved to the same absolute URL. And then for that absolute URL, the package boundary matters. It doesn't matter whether it was derived from a bare specifier, from a relative URL, from an absolute URL. It's all the same URL. And so the package boundary determines how it gets actually interpreted.
Okay, excellent. We have 5 minutes left on the meeting. Jeffrey, you had asked about potentially talking about number 227. Do you want to present that really quickly, and then maybe we can get that ended?
What was 227?
That was the references. Will you
yeah.
You want to screen share it just so people can see it really quickly?
It was very small. Let me share my screen again. This was just, so we have 2 proposals now, and they're kind of buried in comments to like meeting invites and stuff. So I wanted to this is it. I wanted to add the links to these proposals onto the like phase 2 doc. This doesn't mean that they're accepted or anything like that. It's just that they're suggestions for, you know, those points on the phase 2. And then I also put a link. I mean, if people object to this, I can take this out, but I put a link to the plan for new modules implementation file from the main README, and a link also to the ECMAScript modules repo from the main README, you know, just because those are very relevant and it seems like we should probably link to them. So anyone have any objection to this?
Ship it.
All right, thank you.
Okay, excellent. So we got through the whole agenda. We've got 3 minutes left. Maybe I can quickly check YouTube and see if there's any questions. There's nothing in the chat.
Miles, can I ask, so I'll make those changes to the proposals. Both proposals are in repos of their own, so people can please open issues there to raise points about them. And we'll try to address all of them. And then I'd love to try to move them towards, I guess, approval at some point, so we could start making implementations based off them, assuming that's probably the way forward.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. And if you think that that's something that we should document, maybe we could open a PR just about kind of like the process for external repos. But I think it's pretty reasonable to assume we're just going to work on those in their own repos. Jan, you have your hand up?
I think one nice way to get them to approval would be to open a pull request against Guy's Revolver spec, because then we can make it very clear what was agreed on in like pseudocode.
I'm a huge +1 on that myself. Like, and I think like, especially maybe having executive summaries at the top. I know that's maybe an obnoxious way to frame it, but you know, there's a lot of context spread throughout them, and a combination of like a short summary and specification text can actually kind of cut right to the meat of what's going on.
I'll work on adding that.
All right, great. I'm going to go ahead and stop the stream.